start? Memories of My Home Life on the Cold Spring Ranch by Irene Gilchrist, nee Oelrich. Read by Kate Seaman. My sister Katie wanted me to gather the wool from our earlier days on the ranch, in the valley we knew as 1 Mile Valley. I now sit down to write what I have to offer and hope that it will be of some little help. She has it over me by a few years, so I don't know if my contribution will be of much value. Some of the things I remember best are little things handed down to us from father and mother. Of how mother rode on horseback as a bride from her home in Lower Nicola to the ranch in 1898. On the only path there was at that time used by Indians mostly on their ways north and south to and from sports day celebrations. These included such sports as horse races, tug-of-war, greased pigs race, where they were allowed to keep the pig, and many other competitions. Later, Mother made another trip to Nicola with a small baby in front of her on the saddle. It was shortly after this that Grandpa Lindley came to live with us, where he spent his last days. I remember some of the snowstorms through the years, sometimes going up to 4 or 5 feet deep or more, very often even with our windowsills. The young uns, mostly my younger brothers and I, would build tunnels and houses under the icy crusts and play for hours in peace and joy. At other times we would run and play on sleigh ride on top of the crust. This went on until Pop one day took a short cut to his work and tumbled into one of our tunnels. We quickly changed our playgrounds to safer quarters. One winter the snow was so deep and the crust so hard that the deer had a hard time to keep from starving, and were easy targets for coyotes and cougars. That winter Pop and my brother Johnny hauled hay up to the benches in sight of the house to feed the deer and keep an eye on coyotes. Mother also was a good rifle marksman. I dearly loved winter, which brought Christmas and New Year's Day, my birthday, and joyful sleigh rides with Pop and Mama to dances and suppers to some neighbors' homes miles away, where friends and neighbors would gather for an evening of fun and frolic. Pop would pile hay in the sleigh and plenty of blankets. Mother heated bricks for their feet. The neighbors, some of them, would supply the music on banjos, accordions, violins, guitars, mouth organs, and in some places a piano, with someone singing or calling dances. The sleigh rides at night were beautiful, with sleigh bells ringing and 1 or 2 coal oil lanterns lighting the way. Sometimes a full moon lighting the diamonds on the snow, outlining the snow-covered trees, making a fairyland of the streams with frost-covered willows, bending down to touch the rippling water or solid shimmering ice. Other times everyone for miles around would gather at our place, and we small ones would gaze in awe at the huge table loaded with a large turkey roasted and stuffed with all the trimmings. The turkey sat amongst Mother's best dishes and silverware, on her white brocaded tablecloths with candles for light, a feast for kings. I can remember the haunting wail of coyotes and wolves at night, and watching flocks of geese and wild turkeys and ducks flying low going north or south, and listening to their lonely honking, wishing I could follow too. In the spring were also herds of deer and many black and brown bear roaming the hills and fields for food. Sometimes we would spot a cougar or lynx, and sometimes bobcats and skunks. Once Susan Allison, when a small girl, found a nest of baby skunks and took them home to her father, as she thought they were little kittens. I don't think her father was very happy with her present. We loved watching the beaver build dams and houses. There were many muskrats and some mink, otters and fishers along the creek. One time in the winter a pure white weasel with black-tipped tail made his winter home in our house, and it was one winter where we were not bothered with mice. My brother Johnny had a trap line where one winter he caught a large, beautiful Arctic or snowy owl. My brother Al and I were playing on a hill above the wagon road when 2 huge golden eagles flew by on a level with where we were standing. I remember this well, as it frightened Al, one who was about 4 years old, nearly out of his wits, and he lost no time getting home and a half-mile away. I tagged along behind, wanting to stay and watch the birds. My mother once shot a bald eagle with an 11-foot wing spread, who was killing our turkeys in the field. When we were quite small, we would watch Pop clear land and build huge piles of brush, which he would burn in the fall many times at night when we could watch the flames go high in the sky. when Pop and the older children had time to keep the fires under control. In winter we hauled water from one of the large springs in large oak barrels on a homemade sled with a team of horses. In the summer, Pop had iron pipes running from Oelrich Creek to some barrels near the house for our summer supply of water. I remember our first school, which Pop got started when I was 7 years old. My brother Al had to start at 5 years old to make up enough pupils to open the school. It was almost 3 miles away, where we walked in summer and rode in cutters or on horses in winter. One very cold morning after an all-night snowstorm, my older sisters, Carrie and Gert, and myself started to school in the cutter with old Tilly in harness, going only half a mile, having to return home because the snow piled up so badly in front of the cutter that Tilly could go no farther. My sisters took saddle horses and rode to school, as they had to light the fire for the teacher and other children. One other winter, Father, his friend Bill Allison, his son Henry, Brother Alfred, and my brother Johnny went hunting on Storm King Mountain. A terrific snowstorm caught them, causing my brother to lose his way. He spent the night on the mountain, digging a hole in the snow beside a big fallen tree and building a fire in front of him. His hands and feet were frostbitten, so Father and Mother put him to bed, packing his feet, hands, and face in snow. He spent several days recuperating from his experience. My father and his friends were searching for him, but when it got dark they had to call off the search until daylight. In the morning they were out again, and he was able to signal from where he was. When Al and I were small, we saw only wagons and horses traveling on the roads, and I can still recall the first car coming through. It caused quite a sensation. Later, 11 huge Mack logging trucks with solid rubber tires went through, going towards Merritt. We could hear them coming for miles before they came in sight. You can be sure the whole family was there to meet them. I've often wondered since how they managed to get through on our narrow, winding little wagon road. Two of my favorite people used to come down from Aspen Grove, stopping in at the ranch for a short visit. They were Mr. and Mrs. Alonzo Roberts. When I was a wee baby, Mother told us Mrs. Roberts would hold me standing upright on the palms of her hands when I was only 3 or 4 months old. Mrs. Roberts called me her little wild fawn, for very often I would be playing alone in the hills or woods a mile or more away and would run like a deer to be home when they arrived. I've written to some length on the winters at home. Now I shall try a bit about summer. I recall a devastating thunderstorm with a cloudburst that washed away a specially raised purebred batch of leghorn chicks, half grown, that Mother was quite proud of. It also cut huge channels in Pop's alfalfa fields in a matter of minutes. I do not know if they still have such vicious thunderstorms in the valley as the ones I remember, sometimes with hailstones like marbles and winds that mowed trees down like a scythe in the hay fields. I know I've only seen one storm since those at the ranch that could compare with them, this storm being in the Caribou. In the spring on the ranch, at times all our lower meadows were filled with water. It would seem we were living on a beautiful lake shore. My brother Al and I would go wading after baby ducks, but I do not recall ever catching one. Once we saw a duck with beautiful bright colors on its head and wings. Mother told us it was a wood duck. I've never seen one like it since. After I left school, I was my father's right-hand man, girl. She's got in brackets. I herded sheep, milked up to 21 cows by hand, morning and night. Pop sold cream and butter. I helped in haying time, helped cut and haul the winter's supply of wood and road range on my Sundays off. It was on one of these rides that I had my first look at a bighorn ram. I was on my way home and he was on the rock slides halfway between Baird's ranch and home. He was magnificent. My horse Trixie didn't think so. I had to fight to get her past where he stood. Then I couldn't hold her back all the rest of the way home. I saw him once more the next spring, standing on a rocky ridge watching the sheep below him. I think he left to go back to his home range in the Hope Mountains, or maybe Ashnola country, as I never saw him again. One other thing I remember is the year we had an invasion of grasshoppers. As I recall, we stood and watched what looked like a cloud approaching over the northern hills. We could see the grass disappear like it was melting. Pop and Mom made nets from burlap bags so the children could run with them in the fields, catching the grasshoppers. I have watched turkeys eat them until they could only stand and stare at them, shaking their heads. Of course, the crops were ruined all through the valley. There were the good years, too, when I'd stand and watch the summer breezes playing across the fields, making them look like waves on an ocean of grass with the glorious accent of clover, wild roses and alfalfa. The hills on the eastern slopes were a golden field of wild sunflowers, hence the yellow slopes, with blue, pink, and white lupin touching up the golden glow of sunflower. In the fields the alfalfa was covered with purple bloom, and in places wild columbine lent its scarlet bloom with pink saffron, sainfoin, and goldenrod to enhance the scene. Wild roses, saskatoons, white blossom, choke cherry blooms, blue larkspur, and scarlet trumpets covered the lower side hills and along the road banks. There were berries in abundance, raspberries, saskatoons, Oregon grapes, gooseberries, wild strawberries, with which I remember Mother and my sister Carrie would make into strawberry shortcake and jam. But most often we ate them as dessert with rich cream fresh from the cows. I'm making myself hungry. Father also had black and red currants, tame gooseberries and crab apples, yellow and red in the orchard, and a big tame strawberry patch. Pop grew fantastic gardens, very large ones too. I know because us youngsters had the weeding, thinning, and general upkeep of them when they started to grow. We learned the difference between garden plants and weeds at a very early age. I don't want you to think our early years were all play. We had our chores and they had to be done well. We helped pile the winter wood, carried and piled wood in bins for the house each evening. We're responsible for feeding chickens, turkeys, pigs, gathering eggs, or hunting up wily hens and turkeys that hid their nests in bush or grass. We picked berries and fruit to can. Picked and shelled peas and beans for Mother. In the fall we helped Pop pick potatoes and gather up the other vegetables for winter storage. There was always something to keep little hands busy and happy. We were allowed to fish in the creek, but we always had to clean and wash all we caught. We also found or caught our own bait and baited our own hooks. We also learned to swim in the old 1 Mile Creek, as we called it then. There were beautiful large and small artesian springs on our ranch that were deep and cold all year round, and trout stayed in them all during winter. We could see schools of them deep down. A big day in our lives was the 1st of July when they held a rodeo in Princeton. Father never missed one, loading us all into a wagon with a lunch and spending a whole day at the tracks. I loved the parade, especially the Scottish band with its happiness all in their tartans. Their first car races were a sensation. It was something to see cowboys waving their 10-gallon hats, spurring their cars and whooping, coming around the track in their little bugs, as we called them. The first air show was fantastic. I can still see a large biplane and 6 tiger moths going into the sky at the same time and doing loops and rolls. The cowboys from Merritt, Nickel, and Douglas Lake would stop on their way to and from the rodeo to rest and feed their horses at the ranch, and often entertained us all at their campfires with music and songs. Once while I was visiting Mother and Pop, when my 2 oldest children were just small, I saw a sight that took my breath away. I stepped outside to look north and saw a dog team drawing a rubber-tired cart coming south. It turned out to be Slim Williams from Nome, Alaska, on his way to the Chicago World's Fair. He was met in Princeton and given a big welcome by Salvation Jim, who was a well-known character here in Princeton. And was also a friend of Robert W. Service, whom he met in the gold rush days of '98, and who wrote him into his novel, The Trail of '98. I still have a picture of Slim, his dog team, and Salvation Jim. Mother and Dad handed down another bit of information that may be of interest to my readers. They told us that before the road was built all the way through to Merritt and Spencer's Bridge, the trail was used by the well-known outlaw as a pack trail and getaway trail after a train robbery or other outlaw deeds. Bill Miner and his gang stopped at the ranch after the big train robbery in Vancouver and asked Pop if they could stay there that night, rest and feed their horses and food for themselves. Father said they could and was going to fetch them to the house, but Mother would not have them in the house. She sent food out to them and they slept in the hayloft. Mother sensed something was wrong. It was not until days later that we learned of the train robbery and that the sheriff's posse was on their trail. We heard later that one of their hideouts was at Jack Budd's place beyond Deer Valley on the 5 Mile range. Father built the road from his ranch to Princeton with the help of his brother Fred, who lived on the ranch that is now owned by John Huey. They worked with pick and shovel and a V-shaped scraper drawn by a team of horses. It led over the hills, coming down into the valley where Summers Creek and the 1 Mile Creek joined. I remember when the new road was built, which followed the 1 Mile Creek through the valley. The first road foreman that I can remember is P.Y. Smith, a jolly old rascal who drove the first motorized grader in this area. I also remember a small man who worked for him. His name was Jimmy Bryan. He and his little wife were neighbors to us for a while, living on the old Hoover place. I remember him well because of the way he fought off yellow jackets and hornets when he would run into a nest built in the ground or brush. He would get a branch from a cottonwood or willow, strip it clean, and then go in and literally switch them until they would leave in a swarm. Never once do I recall him ever being stung. I only know he had more courage than I would ever have. My brother and I would make sure there was plenty of space between him and ourselves when this happened. Very often we would go and watch and chat with them when they were working by the ranch. I remember a little white mare, Molly, who was terrified by loud noises, such as thunderclaps, gunshots, and of course blasting. One day we had her on a picket rope in the field when the road gang started blasting. Whenever a blast went off, she would dash to the end of her rope and flip right on. His name was Teddy and incidentally belonged to Katie. I had been riding range on him all day. We were coming home late, both of us weary and tired, taking our time in the late dusk. We were passing the beaver dam at Hoover's place when a silly old beaver slapped his tail on the water. Teddy just left one side of the road, airborne, landing clean on the other side. If I hadn't jumped too, I think I would have been sitting on the road. Always after that, Teddy would go past that spot with his eyes and ears on the water, tossing his head and snorting. Poor Teddy. Another horse we had was old Bell, a retired sulky horse and a pacer. Bell, that's Bill. Pop used him as a buggy horse. We children would ride him. I was herding sheep on him one day, and on a little slope on the trail he stumbled. I swear he went to sleep. I fell, cutting several gashes on my leg on the iron saddle horn of Pop's old saddle. I still have the scars. I did not leave the sheep, but kept them closer to home that day. In the afternoon of that day, a bad thunderstorm came up. My sister Gert rode out to find me to help bring home the sheep. She had stopped on the yellow slope to search for me below when the lightning struck and a tree close behind her, causing her horse to jump downhill. Her back was injured, but she managed to get back in the saddle again and come on home. I had already made it home with the sheep. Sometime in the 1920s, Mr. DeMuth moved his mill to the 1 Mile Valley. His logging was done by horse-drawn wagons and sleighs. The Fallers used crosscut saws. In the mill yard, they used one Cletrac tractor. It was here that we had the first electric lights in the 1 Mile Valley. Graham Gibson was boiler man at the mill at this later date. He built a water wheel on the creek north of the mill, and with the help of a generator he had the mill well lighted with electricity. With this bit of information, I think I will close this little article before it becomes my autobiography, instead of a bit of history, as I could go on reminiscing forever. I really hope it will be of help in rounding out Katie's article on the history of the beautiful valley we all knew as the 1 Mile Valley by I.A. Gilchrist in the year 1976.